Last week, we walked through the ashes of the Tai Po disaster in Hong Kong. We saw how a lethal financial calculation, saving $25 million on cheap foam and nylon mesh, turned a renovation into a tomb for at least 159 people. But as the investigation into Tai Po unfolds, one phrase keeps appearing in the headlines, spoken by survivors and experts alike. This is Grenfell all over again. To understand why Hong Kong burned in 2025, we have to go back to West London in 2017. Because the tragedy of Tai Po didn't start with a spark in a bamboo scaffold. It started here, with a cladding panel that experts knew was dangerous, on a building that ignored its tenants, in a system that prioritized profit over life. This is the story of the original sin. This is Grenfell. It looks innocent, doesn't it? This is a piece of Reno Bond PE55. To the naked eye, it is nothing more than a cosmetic upgrade, a way to make an aging concrete tower look modern, sleek, and valuable. It is weatherproof. It is lightweight. It is the skin of the skyline. But if you were to look closer, past the aluminium shell, into that dark 3mm black core, you wouldn't see construction material. You would see fuel. On the night of June 14th, 2017, this material didn't just fail to stop a fire. It became the engine of one. What happened at Grenfell Tower was not a tragic accident caused by a kitchen appliance. It was a machine meticulously constructed over years of negligence, cost-cutting, and ignored warnings designed, however unintentionally, to kill. It looked like a routine response to a domestic fire. But the physics told a different story. And by the time the experts realized what was happening, the building had already sealed the fate of 72 people. To understand the horror of that night, we first have to understand the home that existed before it. Grenfell Tower wasn't just a council block. It was a vertical village. Built in 1974, the tower was a brutalist concrete structure, typical of the era. It was strong. It was designed with a specific safety principle in mind: compartmentation. The idea was simple and historically effective. If a fire breaks out in one flat, the thick concrete walls and fire doors contain it there. The fire burns itself out, or the fire brigade arrives to extinguish it. This design is the foundation of the stay put policy. Residents are told that in the event of a fire elsewhere in the building, the safest place to be is inside their own flat, with the door and windows closed. For decades, this advice saved lives. On the 4th floor, in flat 16, lived Bihelu Kabeta. He was a taxi driver, a quiet man who loved his community. Like many others, he felt safe here. But in the years leading up to 2017, that feeling of safety had been eroded. The residents knew something was wrong. The Tenant Management Organization, the KCTMO, had recently overseen a massive refurbishment of the tower. They added new windows, a new heating system, and most fatally, that rain screen cladding we saw earlier. The residents complained about power surges. They complained about blocked exits. They wrote on their blog that, quote, "Only a catastrophic event will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of our landlord." They were dismissed. They were labeled as troublemakers. But as we now know from the inquiry, their instincts were sharper than the experts. They were living inside a dormant volcano, and on a cool June night in 2017, the eruption finally began. It is just before 1 a.m. In flat 16 on the 4th floor, Bihelu Kabeta is awake. He smells something acrid, burning plastic. He goes to the kitchen and sees smoke curling from behind his fridge freezer. It's a hotpoint fridge freezer, a standard appliance. A small electrical fault has ignited the insulation foam at the back. Bihelu does exactly what he is supposed to do. He calls 999 immediately. He alerts his neighbors. He shuts off the electricity. He leaves the flat and closes the front door to contain the fire. At this moment, under the old rules of the building, this incident is over. The fire brigade is minutes away. They will enter flat 16, douse the kitchen fire, and write a report. Bihelu is blameless. The inquiry has legally exonerated him. He did everything right. Firefighters arrive within minutes. They break into the flat. They see the fire in the kitchen. It's hot, it's smoky, but it's routine. They begin to fight the flames. But as they spray water on the kitchen appliances, something impossible happens. The fire isn't just burning the fridge. It has found a new fuel source. It attacks the PVC window surround. The intense heat deforms the plastic. The window frame gives way. And suddenly, the fire has an escape route. It leaps out of the window and into the gap behind the new cladding. This is where the timeline shifts from a domestic incident to a disaster. The first 999 calls from the upper floors begin to come in. People on the 20th, 22nd floors report smelling smoke. Operators, trained on the old stay-put protocols, tell them, "Stay in your flat. Close the door. Put a wet towel down. The fire is on the 4th floor. You are safe." But they aren't safe. The fire has bypassed the concrete safety checks entirely. It is climbing the exterior skin of the building like a ladder. And here is the twist. Here is the glitch in the matrix that the firefighters on the ground couldn't see yet. The fire isn't just going up. It's going around. The burning polyethylene is melting. It turns into molten, flaming rain. As it drips down, it ignites the cladding on the floors below. As the heat rises, it ignites the floors above. By 1:30 a.m., the fire has reached the roof. It has taken less than 30 minutes to travel from the 4th floor to the 24th. The compartmentation has failed because the compartment is no longer the flats. The entire building is now one single vertical chimney. And inside those flats, hundreds of people are still being told to stay put, waiting for a rescue that is becoming physically impossible. To understand why the fire moved so unnaturally fast, we need to pause the timeline and look at the physics of the chimney effect and the chemistry of the materials involved. The refurbishment of Grenfell Tower utilized a system known as rain screen cladding. You attach insulation to the concrete, leave a gap for air to circulate, which keeps the building dry and prevents mold, and then you cover it with the aesthetic panel. In normal conditions, that gap acts as a ventilation shaft. But in a fire, that gap becomes a flue. As heat rises, it pulls fresh oxygen in from the bottom, feeding the flames and accelerating the upward draft. This is the stack effect. Behind the panel was Celotex RS 5000 insulation. It's a type of foam that, while thermally efficient, is combustible. When it burns, it releases toxic gases including hydrogen cyanide, a lethal compound used in chemical warfare. But the primary villain was the outer panel, Renobond PE. PE stands for polyethylene. In layman's terms, plastic. In forensic terms, solid petrol. Experts have calculated that the amount of polyethylene cladding on Grenfell Tower possessed the calorific energy equivalent to thousands of liters of petrol. When the fire from flat 16 breached the window, it didn't hit a fire retardant barrier. It hit a fuel tank. As the fire heated the panels, the aluminium skin delaminate. It peeled away. This exposed the polyethylene core directly to the flames. The core melted, caught fire, and dripped downwards, spreading the fire to lower floors, while the stack effect drove the heat upwards. This created a loop of destruction. The building was wrapped in a material that had failed safety tests, sold by manufacturers who knew of its dangers. The inquiry found that Arconic, the manufacturer of the panels, had test data showing how poorly this material performed in a cassette configuration, the exact configuration used on Grenfell. They knew, but the marketing continued. The deep dive takeaway is this: the firefighters weren't fighting a building fire. They were fighting a chemical fire fueled by the building itself. And against that, water hoses were practically useless. By the time the sun rose on June 15th, the tower was a tomb. 72 people had lost their lives. The stay-put policy was only officially abandoned at 2:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours after the fire had become out of control. By then, for many, it was too late. The immediate aftermath was chaos. But the grief quickly turned into a cold, hard demand for answers. How did this happen in one of the richest boroughs in London, in one of the most regulated countries in the world? The Grenfell Tower inquiry was launched to find the truth. It spanned years, examined over 300,000 documents, and heard from hundreds of witnesses. The final report, Phase 2, published in September 2024, was devastating. The report concluded that there was no single villain. Instead, it was a merry-go-round of buck-passing. The tenant management organization, KCTMO, was found to have manipulated the refurbishment to cut costs, ignoring the safety of residents. The architects and contractors failed to identify the risks of the cladding, and the manufacturers, Arconic, Celotex, and Kingspan, were found to have engaged in systematic dishonesty. The inquiry found that manufacturers misled the market about the fire safety of their products. They used test rigs that didn't reflect real-world use. They knew the rating was inferior, yet the products remained on the market, finding their way onto the walls of homes. But here is where the story takes its most frustrating turn. We know what happened. We know who made the decisions. We know why the materials were there. But as of today, not a single person has been handcuffed. The Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service have stated that because the inquiry's evidence cannot be automatically used in criminal trials, they must build their own cases from scratch. They have announced that no criminal charges will be brought until late 2026 or, more likely, 2027. That is 10 years. 10 years from the night of the fire to the first day of a criminal trial. For the families of the victims, this is a decade of limbo. A decade of seeing the companies responsible continue to trade, while their loved ones remain gone. The system that failed them in life is now failing them in the pursuit of justice. The complexity of corporate manslaughter laws means that proving individual liability is incredibly difficult. It is easy to blame a company. It is hard to jail a CEO. When we look at Grenfell, it's easy to get lost in the technicalities. We talk about polyethylene cores, cavity barriers, and building regulations. We talk about the stay-put policy and the failures of the fire brigade's command center. And those things are important. They explain the how, but they don't explain the why. The why is much simpler and much uglier. The why is found in the emails where cost was prioritized over safety. It's found in the decision to switch from a fire-resistant zinc cladding to the cheaper aluminium version to save a few £100,000 on a £10 million project. That saving, that rounding error in a budget, cost 72 lives. The Phase 2 report didn't just blame incompetence. It blamed indifference. It painted a picture of a construction industry and a government that viewed safety regulations not as a moral imperative, but as red tape to be cut. We are now looking at a timeline where justice might not arrive until a full decade after the event. And we have to ask ourselves, is justice delayed, justice denied? If a corporation can kill 72 people through negligence and dishonesty, and then spend 10 years debating the legal fine print, is the law actually working? Grenfell wasn't just a tragedy of engineering. It was a tragedy of inequality. It was a tragedy of people who were told their voices didn't matter until their screams could no longer be ignored. My question to you today is this. The police say the delay is necessary to ensure convictions stick. The families say it's an insult to the dead. Where do you stand? Does the complexity of corporate law excuse a 10-year wait for justice? Or is the system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the truth? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, everyone. See you next time.